Hello folks, today we're going to talk about frame swaps. Our next project is going to involve a frame swap. It's a 1971 International pickup, and I thought it would be, you might find it interesting to, if I went over and talked about some of the pros and cons, if you will, what I think the pros and cons of some of the frames that people have used for frame swaps. I've seen every one of these frames used for a frame swap. So let's get started. The first one is a 1989 Chevrolet S10. The second one is a 1996 Ford Explorer. Third one down there is a 2003 Trailblazer. The fourth one is a 2002 Tahoe. And the last one down there that you can't hardly see at this point is a 2005 Crown Victoria. The S10. The S10 is about 53.5 inches wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface on the front. 54.5 inches wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface in the back. Has coil springs in the front, leaf springs in the back. It's got a 7.5 inch rear axle, which is a small rear axle. The steering on it is a recirculating ball steering. If you do a Google search or you do a search on YouTube, you're going to find pages and pages of people who have done S10 swaps on a lot. So the 40s, the 50s, I've seen it on some 60s, pickups, cars. It's popular. The downside of it is the axle width, right? So the 53.5 inch width up front is smaller than, let's see, it's narrower than anything built since 1940, and I'd have to go actually check to see where that's at, but your 60s, 50s, 60s pickups are about 60, 62 inches wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface. The way people get around that with the S10 chassis is they put 2-inch spacers on the front and rear. That's not my preference. Does it work? Yes, it works. It's a nice frame. There's a lot of flat area where the cab goes. It's not a high kick up for where the bed's at. The front doesn't have a high kick up, so you don't have a lot of interference with mounting the cab on there. And it doesn't, you can work with the bed on the back because it doesn't have a huge kick up and take up a lot of the bed space. So for a cruiser, it obviously works pretty well. Hundreds of people have done it. There's even companies that have made a business model out of providing the brackets to bolt various cabs on this. I guess the last piece, so you notice I didn't give the wheelbase, and I'm not really going to talk about the wheelbase on any of these. Wikipedia is actually a good resource on the wheelbase. So, just type in your model, and your trim, whichever trim. This one happens to be, this S10 is an extended cab, short bed, so it has, I think, 108 inch wheelbase on it. I don't worry too much about that. Shortening, lengthening the frame, that's the easy part of frame swaps. So yeah, I'm not going to focus on that. But Wikipedia is a good resource. Now, that said, Wikipedia is not a good resource for how wide these things are. Right, the standard method of reporting the track width is from the center of the tire to the center of the tire, right? So it's going to measure, it's going to give you the dimension using stock rims and stock tires. It's going to give you the dimension from the center of this tire to the center of that tire. While that may be the same as the wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface dimension, 99 times out of 100, it's not going to be the same, right? Because it's basically that measurement is taking into account the wheel offset that's on there, and effectively the width of the tire too, right? So if the wheel offset's here and the tire's this wide, the center line's going to be here. If the tire is really narrow, the center line's going to be here. So it's kind of a misreported number on forums and things like that. The safest thing to do is just take the tires off and measure from the wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface. Other than that, you're probably going to be disappointed. Let's go to the 1996 Ford Explorer, talk a little bit about it. Okay, 1996 Ford Explorer. Disc brakes up front, disc brakes in the rear, has torsion bar springs up front, leaf springs in the rear, rack and pinion. The Explorer also gives you the 8.8 rear end. In many cases on the Explorer, it's going to be a posi track. And I'm sorry, I always get confused what the Ford and the Chevy and the Chrysler calls their limited slip differential, so I'm just going to call it a posi track. You can correct me in the comments. So the 8.8 Ford is almost an exact copy of the 12-bolt Chevy, to the point that the bearings are the same. It's really close. It is really, really close. I've swapped the parts in them, you know, just looking at what fits and what doesn't fit, and they will bolt together. Now, I wouldn't run the rear ends with the parts swapped, but they are really close. So when you, if you're unfamiliar with the 8.8 Ford and you're a Chevy guy, the 8.8 Ford is a 12-bolt Chevy. So Chevy stopped making the car 12 bolts mid-70s, right? So they've made the truck 12 bolts, but the car 12 bolts, that was actually a short-lived affair. So the 8.8 is a really good rear end. I went off on a rabbit hole, didn't I? Sorry about that. Let's get back on this. So disc brakes up front, disc brakes in the rear, it has torsion bars in the front, leafs in the rear, rack and pinion steering, 8.8 rear end. A lot of times you get a posi track, which this one has. This is a 373 posi track rear end. This is a nice chassis in terms of the pieces and all in. This is a great donor chassis. It's got all the good stuff, right? It's got the disc brakes, the rack and pinion, the heavy duty rear end. More importantly, the kick up on this frame, even more so than the S10, right? The kick up is nice, right? So pickups work well on this. The kick up in the back is relatively shallow, so it's going to allow you to fit the beds pretty well. Now, I really considered using this chassis on the International pickup that we're frame swapping, but the front wheel dimension on the Explorer is 57 inches, so wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface is 57 inches. The back is 59.5 inches. Those dimensions work really, really well with a 57 Chevy pickup I've got. So rather than use this to build the International, I'm going to use this to put together the 57 Chevy that it's on the list, right? Probably not going to be the next project, probably like 3 projects in from given the list of projects got going on right now. Or I don't know why more people don't focus on using the Explorer. I suspect it's because of the torsion bar front suspension. The other issue that may be causing some, you know, people may have people walk away is a lot of these Explorers are 4-wheel drive. Right, so I don't know if you can see it here, but this was a 4-wheel drive. And so the question is, well, okay, I don't want a 4-wheel drive, what am I going to do? Well, the easy thing to do is just take the half shaft that, you know, that comes in out of the transfer case and cut that thing off right at the spindle and just leave it bolted in. I'm not positive on the Explorer, but when I looked at it, it looks like the front hub bearing is one of those that needs the spindle to keep the bearing from coming apart. A lot, I don't know if a lot or not many or whatever, but a number of the hubs have a shoulder on the back side of that inner bearing race, and so the hub can't come off. I don't know. It's just easier. Cut the axle off, leave the stub shaft in there. Bob's your uncle. Let's get on down the road. It's a 2-wheel drive. I think that's it on this one. Let's go to the 2003 Trailblazer. Well, the sun's coming up over the roof of the shop. Having a hard time seeing the camera, so let's see if I can speed this along a little bit. So this is a 2003 Chevy Trailblazer, has disc brakes up front, disc brakes in the rear, coil springs up front, coil springs in the rear, rack and pinion steering. All in all, it looks like this is a good foundation for a hot rod, right? And by and large, I would agree with you. The couple of things that are negatives is the rear end and the bolt pattern on the wheels. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I said the S10 had a 7.5 inch rear end in it. That's kind of a lightweight, that's a puny rear end. You hot rod it, you're gonna break it, but it's leaf springs. It's easy to put another rear end in the S10. The Trailblazer. Trailblazer has an 8-inch Chevy rear end in it. The full size is like what's in the Tahoe. It's an 8.6 rear end. Lots of hot rod parts, right? You break it, easy to find parts for the 8.6. The 8-inch, it's not as common. It's not a hot rod rear end in terms of lots of aftermarket support. Maybe you can find a POSA lock for it, but it's probably the GM government lock, which isn't highly thought of. How about that? Don't want to be overly critical of that. But by and large, it sucks. The other thing is the wheel bolt pattern. And I don't know if you can see it here. I'm having a hard time seeing it because of the sun. But the wheel bolt pattern is a 6-lug wheel bolt pattern, which is like the Chevy Tahoe. The problem is the Chevy Tahoe pattern is the same pattern that Chevy's been using since the 20s. I don't know what year, but it's somewhere in the 20s they started using a 6-hole bolt pattern. And that's the standard, right? It's the same one Datsun and Dodge on their D50s and Toyota, right? 6 bolts, 5.5 inch bolt circle. Trailblazer, it's an animal all by itself, and whatever variants, you know, the Buicks and the Isuzus, whatever platform this was in the years they made this, you know, they're all that, but this is like a 6-on-5. Wheel selection is tough, right? There's not much aftermarket support. It's a pain. To be fair, you can convert this to a small Chevy bolt pattern. There's a guy on YouTube that does it on his Trailblazer. You use like an S10 front hub. It's like a 2004 S10 front hub, which is a small Chevy bolt pattern. Use the rear disc off of a 2010 Camaro, something like that. You have to get the caliper bracket off the extended Trailblazer. You can use the same caliper. Anyway, all that stuff fits together with minimal work. The pilots are slightly different, but no big deal. The back, you really don't have an option in the back. If you can find they're just no good option. You can move up from an 8-inch rear end if you can find a Trailblazer SS rear end, but it's still the 6-lug bolt pattern. Really, the only option you got is weld up the holes, the lug holes, and drill out 5 new ones. The hubs aren't big enough. The axle faces aren't big enough to put the normal 6-lug in it, so you got to go with a 5-lug, or you just got to buy new axles. Unlike the S10, putting another rear end of this is a problem, right? It's 4-link suspension, it's got coil springs, lots of effort to put a different rear end, as opposed to the S10. I got to weld 2 spring perches on, and yeah, I'm done. So in my case, the Trailblazer it isn't going to get used until I get until I got a plan on how to fix an economical way to fix the rear axle and fix the hubs. The other, and this is just a side note, but GM's already started obsoleting parts on this thing. The motor mounts, right? I told you the Trailblazer SS, right? It came with a 5.3 LS. So you would think, well, put an LS in this is pretty straightforward. Well, GM's already obsoleted the brackets, the motor mount brackets. So if you want to bolt it in like the factory, you're going to have to go to a salvage yard, eBay, or something like that, or make your own motor mount brackets, which, you know, in the end isn't a big deal. It's just frustrating that 20 years, I guess, I lose track of time. 20 years, I guess maybe it's reasonable. From a manufacturing standpoint, 20 years, that's long enough. From a hot rod standpoint, just kind of frustrates the hell out of me. Okay, it's already, I think that's all we're going to talk about on that. Let's move to the 2002 Chevy Tahoe. Okay, so 2002 Chevy Tahoe has, it just occurred to me that I didn't give you the dimensions on the Trailblazer. So the front wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface on the front of the Trailblazer, 66 inches. On the back of the Trailblazer, it's 66 inches. That's the other thing about the rear axle. That is a wide rear axle. So finding replacements is yeah, that thing just frustrates me. It's got all the good stuff on it, but it's just got enough to make it a pain in the butt. Okay, the Chevy Trailblazer front wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface is 66.5, so pretty much the same as the Tahoe. The rear is 68.5, so it's a little wider. And you noticed as I set these up, I set them up from narrowest to widest. So Tahoe 66.5 in the front, 68.5 in the back. Has disc brakes up front, disc brakes in the rear. Has torsion bars, springs up front. Has coil springs in the rear. It also has the recirculating ball steering. So kind of disappointing, right? When I pulled this apart, disappointing. It's a 2002 and it hadn't moved to the rack and pinion, but okay. Because my, you know, the 96 Explorer, the 2003 Trailblazer, they both got rack and pinion on them. But my Chevy Tahoe still got the recirculating ball. This has the 8.6 rear end in it. Just for reference, the Chevy 12 bolt, the Ford 8.8, 8.8, 8.6, right? So you got 0.2 of an inch difference in the ring gear. So the 8.6 is a nice heavier end. It's got oh man, it's got 30 spline axles in it, so it's got the bigger axles in it. This one actually happens to be set up for an LS 4L60 two-wheel drive, so this is what I'm going to use on the 71 International to swap. This one, yeah, I'm hoping this is an easy project. The wheelbase on this is 116 inches, which is pretty much where a short wide bed ought to be, 114 to 116. What else can I say about this? The couple of the downsides on the as you get more modern, the frames get wider, right? The frames get wider as the frames get more modern. The old pickups, you can pretty much count on the frames being about 34 inches wide here and just slightly sloping back as you get to the back. So definitely you're going to do cab mounts, right? If you're going to put if you're going to do a frame swap, it makes sense that you're going to do a cab mount. But as you get more modern, your cab mounts, you're going to do cab mounts, but you're probably going to do different cab mounts in the cab, right? So for the S10, you can use a factory cab mounts locations and just put cab mounts on the frame and your cab will bolt on. The Explorer, I think, is going to work out the same way. You can use the factory holes where the cab mounts and just build new brackets on the frame and a cab will bolt on. The Trailblazer, I'm not sure. Like I say, I haven't done near as much measuring on the Trailblazer, but it's possible. Yeah, I'm not even going to say that. I don't know about the Trailblazer. The Tahoe, yeah, from what I've looked at so far, the rear cab mounts are right here. And I've done Chevys, I've done Fords. This is the first International I'm going to do a frame swap on. But the rear cab mounts are going to go right through that gas tank. right? So that's not going to work. So you're going to have to actually make new cab mounting locations on the cab itself. The front ones, looks like the front cab mounts are going to go about right here. So the front's not a big deal. The back, just going to have to reinforce the cab and make new holes in the cab so we can mount the, new cab mounts. Let me move on from there, and I'll come back in a couple of closing comments to that I'm thinking about at this point. Should have talked about them anyway. We'll come back on that. I don't know if there's any other downsides on this. Okay, see if I can finish this up before the sun really starts coming up over there. This is a 2005 Crown Victoria. Has coil springs in the front, coil springs in the back, disc brakes up front, disc brakes in the rear, rack and pinion steering, has the 8.8 rear end. If you get a police car or a law enforcement car, there's a good chance you're going to have posi track in the backs. This one was supposed to be a police car, but it doesn't have the posi track, so I don't know. Nice package, right? If you do a little looking, this is a very popular frame, a donor frame for the 60s Ford pickups. And I've seen, I don't know, I saw someone swapping like a 96 Ford on one of these things. Not sure why the Chevys didn't pop up, but it seems to be people really focus on putting this under Ford pickups. The front wheel mounting surface dimension is 67 inches. The rear wheel mounting surface to wheel mounting surface is 70 inches. That is wide. If you look at, you go look at the videos, look on the web. One of the real issues that everybody has when they do this swap on one of the 50s, 60s, 70s pickups is it is hard to match up rims and tires to stay inside the wheel wells. All right, 70 inches is wide. 60, you got the Tahoe, and that's like a Silverado. Not that I'd want to put this under a Silverado, but that's 68.5 inches. That's 70 inches, right? So even compared to a modern vehicle, 70 inches is wide. I'm still working on this. I've got a 63 Ford short wide bed that I got this chassis to put that body on, but I haven't worked my way around the tire placement yet. The other issue with using a Crown on an old pickup is the rear kick-up. I haven't put a tape on that. That's about 16, I'm gonna just guess that's about 16 inches. That comes out of the bed floor, right? So if you look at the pickups that's had this swap on it, they're pretty much, they don't have a bed, right? Your normal bed's about that tall. You end up you gotta bring the floor up, or you gotta do all kinds of crazy stuff, but you lose your pickup bed. I live out in the middle of nowhere. A pickup needs to be a pickup. It doesn't do me a lot of good to have a cruiser that is only happy on a parking lot. All right, so I'm still pondering what I'm going to do with the Ford. I like this setup. I like it's got all the good stuff on it. And honestly, fixing the rear isn't that big a deal. I just put a narrow rear end in it and get on down the road. I've seen people cut the front suspensions in half, right? Cut the cross member in half to get it narrower, weld it back together. There's a company that makes a steel one that's narrower. Yeah, I don't know. The whole idea of my hot rodding is not spend life savings doing it, right? So we try to stay on a budget and don't spend the money we don't have to spend. So I'm still thinking about that one. A couple of things I forgot as we was going along. In almost any frame swap, and I think I'm gonna move the camera back in the shade so I can actually see. Couple of points on any frame swap on a pickup. It's almost guaranteed you're going to cut the front frame horns off, right? You just give up trying to make it work. You're gonna cut them off because the modern radiators are generally long and short. The older radiators are more tall and narrow. That's not exactly true, but it's kind of a general trend. Anyway, you just might as well go into it thinking you're going to cut those off. Where you cut them off, that's where the trick is, right? The other piece is, before you take your vehicle apart, you need a reference measurement. The one I use is, I get a measurement from the center of the wheel to the front cab mount. And that's sort of like my reference. As long as I get my cab mount bracket, my new cab mount bracket, welded on my donor frame, and the center of my cab mount bracket that I weld on is that distance to the center line of the front wheel, then I can be pretty assured that when I put my cab on my donor frame, that the front wheels are going to line up. It's amazing how easy it is to forget that that's really the key dimension on doing a swap. The front wheel has to align in the fender. Otherwise, it looks like shit. To make it even more complicated, you need to really look at your donor vehicle, you need to look at your project vehicle. You know, get an aired up front tire on one side, right? Put a front and a back, aired up tires, right? Set it on the ground on as level as you can and look. A lot of the old pickups, either the rear wheel isn't centered in the rear fender or the front wheel isn't centered in the front fender. So if you don't like the way it looks, this is the time to fix it, right? I mean, you're putting a donor, you're changing the frame on it. Make sure you like where the front wheel sits in the front fender. I don't know how many of the things I've been involved in over the years that you end up spending 2 weeks trying to get the cab to fit on the frame, because you move it here, you move it there, and in the end, every time I sort of asked questions or talked about it, they didn't take that measurement, right? You need a reference point so you're not chasing your tail. My reference point, center line of the front axle to the front cab mount on my vehicle. I keep that dimension, everything is going to work a lot smoother. Didn't say it's going to be problem free, but at least you're going to be in the ballpark. So let's see if I've got it. Oh, the last thing that I really want to hit is wheels. And I'll show you this again once I get the Tahoe in the shop and we start cleaning it up so I can get the cab on. I'll highlight this again, but just at a high level, the modern, if you look at a modern vehicle, disc brakes on a modern vehicle, not even sure when the trend started, but the wheels started becoming more positive offset rather than negative offset. I'm an old hot rodder, right? I like the big, negative offset wheels. Anyway, when they started going to the positive offsets, the caliper on the disc brakes started migrating its way out. So if I pull the wheel off of that Tahoe, or if I pull actually the Tahoe, the Explorer, not so much the Explorer, the Tahoe, the Trailblazer, and the Crown Vic, if I pull the wheel off and we take a look at the disc brakes on it, you're going to find that the caliper bracket is actually outboard, right? The caliper bracket on those three is going to be outboard of the face of where the wheel bolts. That means an old school wheel will not fit those, even though the bolt patterns are going to be the same. An old school wheel won't fit those, won't fit on those vehicles, right? Because you have to have a wheel that actually, and I don't even know the best way to say it. I think we'll just leave it, but the takeaway is the caliper bracket extends outboard of the face of the wheel mounting surface. So like I said, once we get that in there and I get a wheel off of it, I'll show you I'll show you more details on that. But it's not something that you normally think about, right? The bolt patterns are the same. Wheels ought to work, but I can tell you, I can pull let's just talk about the Tahoe. I can pull the wheel off my 67 Chevy pickup and it will not go on that Tahoe, even though the bolt patterns are exactly the same. You guys that's familiar with that, you can throw another rabbit in there. The lug bolts on my 67 or 7/16, those things are like 14 millimeters. So you're like, well, it's not going to fit on there anyway because the Tahoe lug studs won't go through the 67 Chevy wheels. Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm just telling you that even if, in my case, I run aftermarket wheels, so they got bigger holes in them. But even if you get it on there, you're not getting. It's not going to clear the brake calipers. I know I went through this fast. I'm videotaping this outside, obviously, trying to. I wanted to make this to try to highlight the various options you have. Quite honestly, I'm ready to get started on the International. All right, I think that's enough. That's enough randomly. That's enough random. That's enough random rambling. There we go. About the whole thing. Probably wasn't very excited to most of you, but I wanted to sort of document this. I've looked, I don't know how many times, for the dimensions of front and rear dimensions on these frames, and it seems like everybody's got a different opinion. I actually measured them, so you know, take the numbers I gave you plus or minus 1/4 of an inch. That ought to be close enough. I'm anxious to get started on the International, so I'm gonna try to wrap this video up. I'm gonna get it edited. We'll get it posted. I can pull my mess out of the backyard, take it back down to the pasture, and we can get started on the 71. So I appreciate for you know, for those of you who watched, I appreciate you watching. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff, make a comment, and I'll see you next time when we're going to be cleaning up that Tahoe and getting ready to put the cab on it. So until next time, thank you.